All right, today we're going to dive into a really interesting case from the Philippine Supreme Court, Racho versus Tanaka. Now, this is a story about love and law and a kind of crazy legal loophole that trapped Filipinos in marriages that were, well, already over. We're going to see how one woman's fight basically changed the rules for everyone.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. We're going to break it all down using the classic structure of a case digest. We'll start with the facts, figure out the core legal issue, then get to the Supreme Court's ruling, and probably most importantly, why they ruled the way they did. It really helps to see the whole story unfold.
So just try to imagine this for a second. You get divorced abroad, you are legally totally single in that country, but then you come back home to the Philippines, and guess what? The law still says you're married. It's this bizarre legal limbo, and that's exactly the situation that trapped not just Rodora Racho, but so many other Filipinos. Okay, so first up, let's get into the facts. Let's meet the woman at the very center of all this, Rodora Racho.
So Rodora's whole journey here took about 10 years, believe it or not. It starts back in 2001, when she marries Seiichi Tanaka, who's a Japanese national. Fast forward 9 years, and they get a divorce in Japan. But here's the kicker. When she tried to get that divorce recognized in the Philippines, the local court said nope. Her back was against the wall, so her only real option was to take it all the way to the top, filing what's called a petition for review with the Supreme Court.
And you can just imagine the bureaucratic nightmare she was in. She went to the civil registry, they told her she needed a court order. The Department of Foreign Affairs to get her passport fixed, same thing, court order. The National Statistics Office, you guessed it, needed a court order. But the court had already said no. She was caught in this impossible loop, just completely trapped.
Right, so this all brings us to the core legal issue. What was the one big question the Supreme Court really had to answer here?
Okay, so it all boiled down to this one simple thing. Was the evidence she presented, was it enough? She had this divorce certificate, right? But was that sufficient to prove, under Philippine law, that her Japanese divorce was legit? The lower court had already said no. So now, it was all up to the Supreme Court to make the final decision.
So after all those years of legal fights, the Supreme Court was finally ready to give its answer.
And that answer was a very clear, very firm yes.
Now, the court said that yes, foreign divorces can be recognized, but, and this is a big but, it laid out a very clear process. You have to prove two specific things as facts. First, you have to prove the national law of your foreign spouse on divorce. Second, you have to prove the divorce decree itself, and this is key. It's not enough to just show up with the papers. You have to formally prove in court that they are real and authentic.
So, the big question is, why? Why did the court rule this way? Let's dig into their reasoning, what lawyers call the ratio decidendi. This is the logic that really changed everything for how these cases are seen in the Philippines.
So the whole case really turns on this one part of the Family Code, Article 26. And really, it's all about common sense. The whole point of this law is to avoid this totally unfair and frankly absurd situation where the foreign ex-spouse can go and remarry, but the Filipino spouse is still legally stuck in that marriage. It just doesn't make sense.
Okay, the court's logic was built on three really solid points. First, the evidence. They accepted a new document she submitted, this Certificate of Acceptance of the Report of Divorce, and said, yep, this is good enough proof because it's been properly authenticated. Second, and this one is a huge deal, they said it doesn't matter who started the divorce, the Filipino or the foreigner. And third, they made it crystal clear, trapping a Filipino spouse in a marriage like this is discriminatory. It's unconstitutional.
And they didn't stop there. The court made a really strong point about gender equality. Justice Leonin, who actually wrote the decision, said that to rule any other way would just contribute to the patriarchy. He's pointing out that it's often Filipino women in these situations, and this old interpretation of the law was putting them at a serious disadvantage. So you can really see the shift in thinking here. The old argument was super restrictive, saying only the foreign spouse could be the one to file for divorce. The Supreme Court just threw that whole idea out. They said, no, let's focus on what's fair and equal. The whole point isn't to punish the Filipino spouse, it's to fix a legal situation that just doesn't make any sense.
So what is the big legal principle we can all take away from this case?
So what's the big takeaway here? Well, this case basically gives us a clear 4-step playbook. Step 1, you file the petition.
Step 2, you have to prove that your foreign ex-spouse's country actually allows for divorce. Step 3, you have to prove the divorce really happened, using official, authenticated documents. You do all that, and Step 4 is the court declaring that the Filipino spouse is free to remarry.
Which brings us to our final section. What happened to Rodora Racho in the end?
In the final word from the court, it was simple but absolutely life-changing for her. The petition was granted. The Supreme Court officially declared Rodora Rancho capacitated to remarry. Just like that, her legal nightmare was finally over.
You know, the Racho case was a huge step forward. It fixed a really serious legal injustice for Filipinos. But it does make you think, doesn't it? It kind of opens up a bigger conversation. If our courts can recognize the end of a marriage that happened abroad, it poses the question, as our world gets more connected, what other parts of our laws need to evolve right along with it?